Hello again on the UK edition. Less than 2 weeks to go before the election. Which way will it go? Which way will the Indian vote go? We can do a little more than guess or listen to the guesses of others. We have for the first time a poll conducted by YouGov on behalf of India Inc. that looks at the likely voting pattern among Indians in this election, and the indication telling but still not definite. Manoj, this is a survey of the kind we've never seen before, looking at the way the Indian vote might go in an election. First, how far is this insulated from your own political views?
Well, actually, it's a very good question. That it's the first time ever that a survey has been done of the polling intentions, of the voting intentions of the British Indian community. It's a community that only represents 2% of the total British population, but contributes somewhere in the region of 6% of its GDP. And in London, it contributes a staggering 10% of its GDP. So British Indians are a very, very important constituency. They're important for the British economy, and they matter in elections, and their political views do matter. So it also surprised me that before we started this journey that there hadn't ever been a poll like this. Now, as for the...
What led you to initiate this poll?
I felt that, look, there has been a huge debate in the UK about its relationship with India and political parties' engagement with the Indian community.
But is this poll separate from your position in that debate?
Well, absolutely, because this poll has been commissioned by India Inc. and by India Global Business, but it's been conducted through YouGov, which is a well-known and reputed polling organisation, which you will know as well. So it's absolutely arm's length from us, and the results have been quite staggering, and sometimes I guess people will be quite surprised by the outcome, because it's not as clear-cut as what some people may have argued a few days or weeks ago.
What is the methodology used?
So it's an online poll, but there are certain weightages to ensure that it's reflective of the entire community by way of its age demographics, by way of religion, educational background. So it's a poll like any other poll that is conducted scientifically by leading polling agencies.
So with that out of the way now, what does it tell us?
There are a number of very revealing facts that come out of this. The first is that the slide away from the Labour Party has been quite dramatic over the last 2 years. So,
but this is, you say, over the last 2 years, but over the last few elections, we've been seeing a shift. Is this now accelerating, according to this survey?
Absolutely. When I was growing up, British Indians voted en masse for one party, that's the Labour Party. There was no other second choice in the matter. My parents voted, my uncles and aunts voted, our neighbours voted for the Labour Party. But over the last few years, there has been a shift away from the Labour Party. People have had a hunch that Indians are tilting towards other political parties, namely the Conservative Party. But what is staggering is that since the 2017 election, this poll reveals that there's been a 12-point shift away from the Labour Party, which is dramatic.
You say, yes, that is dramatic, but that's since 2017. So are you suggesting by implication that there is no particular shift following very recent events such as the Labour resolution on Jammu and Kashmir?
Well, no, this poll was conducted just over the last few days, and therefore this will certainly have been a factor. The Labour Party's position, as you know, on Jammu and Kashmir has created a lot of angst within the British Indian community.
But how far could they influence the way the vote goes?
I think, look, in terms of when it comes to actual voting, the poll also reveals that attitudes towards the Indian community by various political parties is a factor, but it's not the predominant factor in these elections. Brexit, the economy are certainly bigger factors, and which shows that the British Indian community is a community that has very nuanced views on a wide variety of issues. It's certainly not a block vote, which either political parties or some people within, some observers may have thought that it is a block vote. It certainly isn't.
So if it's not a block vote, that means that the shift that your survey suggests does not necessarily arise, one, from the Labour Party position on Jammu and Kashmir, and to the extent there is a view on that, it may not be a decisive or even a significantly influential view.
It is a factor. It certainly is a factor. And given where we are with the polls, that it is all up for grabs at the moment. Every seat will matter, every vote will matter. To that extent, the views of British Indians on issues like Kashmir are a relevant factor within these elections, and therefore it's too early and too close to call to say that, look, they won't have an impact or they will have an impact. All the poll demonstrates is that they are a factor.
And if the result is close enough, nationally or in particular constituencies, then this factor and the counter factor of the Pakistani vote support for Labour over this very issue could even be a tilting factor.
Well, absolutely. There are 10 constituencies in the country where the Asian vote, the South Asian vote, accounts for over 40% of the electorate, over 50 constituencies where it accounts for over 20%, and about 120 constituencies where it accounts for 10% or more of the constituency vote. And therefore, where margins are slim, where there is a real tussle between the main political parties, the Indian vote, the Asian vote certainly, and the Indian vote will matter.
Your poll suggests views also particularly about Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson. What are these indications?
Well, that was quite an interesting
yes.
Aspect of the poll, that British Indians tend to view both Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson with the similar degrees of disdain, or they're not very favourable in their eyes, and therefore I think one message for the Conservative Party certainly is that yes, there is a shift away, or let me put it this way, a disalignment from the Labour Party, but that doesn't mean...
That was the default earlier.
Precisely, that was default earlier, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a slam dunk or a realignment towards the Conservative Party. Actually, what you've seen is the Liberal Democrats, who were polling around 10% of the Indian vote, have jumped up to about 18%.
That seems to be an interesting shift, no, Manoj, because if now an Indian vote is getting more and more favourably inclined towards Lib Dems and Joe Swinson, this would appear to clash with the earlier voting pattern in Brexit, when it was thought that most Indians voted for Brexit.
That's what was thought, but the reality from the poll is that 62% of British Indians still favour a Remain position, or at least a position whereby Britain Brexits, but with a deal rather than a no deal. So to that extent, the arguments that British Indians were overwhelming in favour of Brexit has been blown by this particular poll.
But on that plane, it would take the Indian vote, assuming there is such a thing as an Indian vote, and there may not be, as you suggest, but if there is a significant trend within that, this would take the trend within Indian vote towards Labour rather than the Tories. So it's all mixed up on different planes, isn't it?
That's the really interesting fact about this. There are so many variations and nuances within this poll that it makes it really, really interesting and indeed exciting for people that are watching these elections to say what's going to happen next.
But and now this is a plainly fishing question, but what else does your survey indicate of interest?
One interesting question was around relations between the UK and India.
Yes.
And a large number of British Indians feel that Britain is not doing enough to engage with India, and therefore more needs to be done.
Whether Tories or Labour?
Whether Tories or Labour, to improve relations with India. That's the first thing. And secondly, specifically on trade and investment, whether Labour or Conservative, the British government in Britain needs to be doing more to engage India on trade and investment matters as well.
But on relations with India, is the voter position, as this poll suggests, so neutral as to seek a better deal with India, whether Tories or Labour, because it will be a very different scenario between the two parties. If Labour comes into government, we can certainly expect a long period of diplomatic conflict at the least between India and Britain.
We'll have to wait and watch and see what actually happens on the 13th of December and whether or not Labour have the numbers to form a government. And as we've seen in politics in the UK and in other parts of the world, what's positioned and said in the lead up to a vote and what happens when a political party and political leader are in government can be completely different. And I hope that that these results will have a sobering effect
and
across the board.
Your guess on the result?
It's difficult to say. As of now, it is all open. The overall polls suggest a lead for the Conservatives, but there is a large number of swing voters. So, like I said before, as with the Indian community, the wider British population is also quite excited to see what the results would be. They are very, very important elections. So I would hope to see a clear mandate, whichever way it is. But I think that on balance, people are a little fatigued, to say the least, about Brexit, and to that extent, getting the deal done and moving on to other matters is something that's important for Brits generally.
Yes, but since the poll, there has been a significant new development by way of the Labour Party manifesto. And now it speaks about concern about international matters, lists Kashmir first. It says that on Blue Star we will have a public inquiry. Clearly, no declaration can be unmindful of voting blocs within the Indian community. Do you think that this manifesto is likely to be divisive within the Indian community?
Yes, it's very disappointing that that the Labour Party has taken this view and this position. In all fairness, they took this position in 2017, but the point is that if you're seeing one of your strongest votes disintegrating before your eyes, meaning the British Indian vote, surely you would want to address their concerns, or at least be balanced, and to use the phrase of Barry Gardiner, a very senior shadow cabinet minister, and somebody who's been a strong friend of India over many years and a Labour Party member of Parliament, who has said that of the resolution that was passed by the Labour Party, the anti-India resolution, that it was ill-conceived and partisan.
Manoj, thanks very much for speaking with us, and thanks very much for having got this survey done. It's the first time we've seen something like a YouGov poll on the way the Indian vote might go. We think it's peripheral, but these are huge numbers. They could be decisive numbers given a certain delicately balanced situation, and it's most illuminating, most interesting. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Something to think about over a short break, and then let's get to what could be a telling constituency.